Hello, my name is Tanya Octave, and I have created this webinar in the hopes that it will be helpful and educational for some people out there. So, the impact of traumas has on our adrenals. Then I just kind of want to read a disclaimer before we begin. The information in this presentation is not intended to replace a one-on-one relationship with a qualified spiritual, mental, physical health professional. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any illness or disease. This presentation is intended as a means of sharing knowledge, research, and experience of Tanya Octave, licensed clinical social worker, and of other experts in spiritual, mental, and physical wellness who have contributed to the overall information presented. We are encouraged, or you are encouraged, to make your own spiritual, mental, and physical healthcare decisions based on your research and in collaboration with a qualified professional. So I just like to begin that this is more for educational purposes and not a form of treatment. So what I'm going to cover today, why trauma, the definitions both of post-traumatic stress disorder, complex trauma, and developmental trauma. Why adrenals? Why did I select adrenals as the organ to kind of focus on? The definition of what I call, or what we now call in research, the HPA axis dysfunction, used to be called adrenal fatigue. The connection with the flight or fight reaction, rest and digest response, and a trauma sensitive meditation experience towards the end. So, just setting a few things up here. So, why trauma? I chose trauma because trauma and attachment lay the foundation for how we experience the world. As a clinician, I have studied several bodies of research in this area, especially bodies of research including ancient civilizations and international studies, because I wanted a more worldwide perspective on this idea of trauma. As a mental health integrative holistic clinician, I have been learning from my patients who have suffered from symptoms of trauma and attachment for well over 20 years. But this particular presentation will focus on trauma. I have discovered that traumas are experienced by all of us. We have this universal shared experience in the world, and it really doesn't matter what our race is, our age, or gender, how much or too much of money, if that's even possible, that we have, what families we're born into, our lifestyles, even life choices. Trauma impacts us all. Trauma impacts you, and trauma impacts me and everyone. In the field of psychology, I often like to reference Sigmund Freud as I've studied him for many years. He was given the kind of, part of the credit for laying the foundation on trauma research. Although when I look at ancient studies, I don't know, Sigmund Freud, I think you kind of got some stuff from some of our ancient ancestors. However, philosophical research in ancient civilizations, such as those documented in Egypt, India, and Greece, explore the universal experiences of trauma. The first people in the world knew trauma impacted the human psychic. If we don't agree about a lot in terms of trauma research and how we're showing up and definitions and how we're expressing and explaining it to people, one thing that we tend to agree on is trauma impacts the psychic. The psyche. Most international studies have different thoughts about mental illness and its existence and or non-existence. However, there is a widely accepted belief that when a trauma occurs, the mind has this way of trying to make sense of the experience. So this is just a quote I'd like to begin with. Traumas are these things that connect us and separate us. Traumas cause pain and healing. Traumas damage and strengthen the mind, body, and spirit. So that kind of leads us, let's talk a little bit about some definitions. Post-traumatic stress disorder. And these are going to be for post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm really going to go over what the clinical presentation of that is in terms of meeting a particular criteria in order to relay a particular level of symptoms to, for example, insurance companies for reimbursement. This is also a way in the helping profession for us to communicate symptom presentation without having to go over a list by simply saying post-traumatic stress disorder, or what most people are commonly known as PTSD. So it's experience or threaten to experience a trauma, and this can be directly or indirectly. One can see, hear, or be told about a trauma or event, and one can have repeated exposure to that trauma. That there then are symptoms that are developing within the body. These could be distressing memories, thoughts, dreams, behaviors, or even reactions. One can experience flashbacks, avoidance, a lapse in memory, the inability to concentrate, and disassociation. One has psychological distress, and this impacts the overall functioning. 3, one avoids memories, thoughts, and feelings associated with the trauma. 4, one develops negative symptoms associated with the trauma, and this could include alterations in their cognitions, their moods, their behaviors, even impulses. There will be memory challenges, exaggerated negative belief patterns, disorganized and disordered thought patterns. Potentially, this could lead to self-blame. It's my fault. I should not have done that. Even self-blaming others. And sometimes I hear this from sexually abused individuals who have survived through the experience, in terms of, why were you wearing that type of thing, right? As if they were encouraging that. Changes in one's enjoyed activities, isolation and removal of oneself and others from situations, and the inability to express and verbalize positive emotions. So that may sit with you and you're thinking, well, I don't think I have PTSD, or I have these, I don't think I've had an experience where there's been a threat to my livelihood. But as we get more into it, we're talking psychic trauma and how it still can be manifested. And I'll give some examples as I continue. 5, there'll be some significant changes in arousal and reactivity as noted in increased irritations, recklessness and self-destructive behaviors, hypervigilance, exaggerated and startled reactions, the inability to focus, and changes in sleeping, eating, and social interaction. So even when I'm doing an assessment or I'm working in a clinical way with clients, I'm always assessing that arousal and reactivity area. The above concerns that they last longer than a month. So if something is less than a month, it would be something more associated with like an acute stress symptom presentation. But if it's going on longer than a month, then we should, explore whether or not this definition will fit. Let's transition to complex trauma. Complex trauma occurs during childhood and disrupts parts of the development and the formation of the sense of self. So part of what is going on in complex trauma is being received by the child during developmental stages. And that's why it's impactful, and that disruption in the formation of the sense of self. There are multiple traumatic events that include profound forms of abuse, neglect, maltreatment, and/or violence. An example of that may be physical abuse by a parent, and living in a community where maybe there's gang violence, there's a lot of police wanting to control for crime in those areas. So those could also contribute to the development, if it's done during developmental years, to complex trauma. The traumatic events are intrusive and impersonal, and the traumas are usually by a caregiver parent and or adult. And the child learns this through their forms of attachment. And if I were to talk about attachment theory, I would share a little bit more in terms of the connection between those two. But this does impact the child's physical, mental, emotional development. And a thing that we often leave out is their spiritual safety. And spirituality. And I just like to include that in the beginning of conversations, even when we're talking about early child development, because that is key, especially in terms of how I look at treatment. Developmental trauma. Developmental trauma is a form of trauma that occurs that is chronic, and it usually occurs throughout a child's developmental stages. And these also include various forms of abuse, neglect, maltreatment, community violence, things like that. But it's more occurring in the home, the child's home environment. And the child is receiving that information in through their senses, and it's overwhelming and often debilitating to the child because there's really no adult, no healthy adult, no available adult who can support and nurture the child through these periods, through these developmental periods. Developmental trauma are physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual abuses. Developmental traumas are sexual abuses. Developmental traumas are medical abuses. I think I saw more of this with the push, with the forcing of immunizations associated with the COVID-19. So I saw a lot of kind of medical abuses being used in that way. Developmental traumas are environmental abuses, things that maybe we don't have as much control over, which may be mold or toxins, things that maybe we do have a little bit control over is our exposure to heavy metals. Developmental traumas are home instability, a parent's untreated mental illness, a parent's incarceration, if there's domestic violence, parental substance use or abuse, divorce is of concern, especially now when they are two adults who are really kind of struggling navigating the divorce process, and how if that is occurring during developmental stages, how the child perceives what is going on can be threatening for them. Abandonment, community violence, and then there's just so many others that kind of fit in that. Right now, I just wanted to take a moment. Anytime I talk about trauma, this may bring up things. I tried not to give too many examples so that it wouldn't agitate some of the thought processes. But if you just take a moment and thinking about post-traumatic, complex trauma, or developmental trauma, this information may be useful. This information may be triggering. This information may be unrecognized and unnoticed. This information may be confusing. This information may provide some relief. This information may make sense to one's life experience. Trauma is experienced differently, and symptom presentation may not fit the same way for all. Trauma is when your choices are taken away, when you are told you don't have but one option. Trauma is when you're pressured to comply and when you are told that there is only one possibility. Trauma is when the body releases cortisol as a response to distress. When you were told something that did not make sense. Trauma is when your adrenals begin to fight for your survival because your choices have been taken away. And we'll just take a few moments here and pause.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was just calling you back. I was just saying she was settling down, and I don't know where Mona went. Playing with balls.
I thought something got broke.
Oh, she don't bring nothing.
I'm talking about her.
Oh. No, I found a little dirt on her. I took that off.
Oh, is she getting tired?
No, she'll be really tired when you get her though, because she found a Christmas ball, so she's playing with that. But I put her a little. She likes your chair, so she likes with the ball sitting up in that spot. And she took all the toys from Mona and put them up in the chair. So Mona said, "Forget it. I'll just go outside." So Mona's sitting in the sun.
She's getting tired?
Mona?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mona's tired just looking at her. Mona's always tired. Uh-oh. You okay, Mama? Okay. I thought she was
Okay,
coughing up something, but she's okay.
I'm gonna go to Laura's furniture or to Jerome's and then I'll be coming back.
Okay,
If
well, we're
she's
just
too much, just call me, I'll pick her up.
we're just relaxing. That's all.
I'll go.
All right, bye. And I think this is what leads me to why focus on the adrenals. Because the adrenals and the connection that I said last slide, that cortisol. So let's see, let's talk a little bit about that. I chose adrenals because it is the body's internal innate healing capacity to protect us under distress. When I started to do research in this area, I wanted to find the organ that is responsible for our stress because how we perceive a situation can determine how that situation is absorbed into the body. This is an example I like to share. You and I both could be on a bus, and that bus could get into an accident. And for you, you may have broken a bone. And you may say to yourself, well, at least I get time off of work. I get to relax. My partner gets to take care of me. I don't have to do anything for the next couple of days. Everyone, I get to, be more carefree. And so, how you experience that, how you perceive that bus accident, you didn't perceive it as traumatic, even though you had a physical injury. I get off of the bus and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I almost died. Did you hear all those sounds? Did you see all that blood? I can't believe. And then now I'm absorbing that trauma, that perception of that experience as traumatic. So when that happens, what does the body do? That is what I wanted to know. And the first organ that shows up are these pretty little triangle things called the adrenals. Adrenals are first to develop in the fetus between 8 to 10 weeks of conception. They are essential for our survival. So we need them. We don't just get to clip them and take them out of the body. Adrenals are the first to support hormonal function and the developing in the developing fetus. And that's important, especially when we start talking about hormones. And let me just connect that to you. Cortisol is a hormone. So when I am distressed, I come off of that bus and I'm like, oh my God, I felt like I was going to die. What happened? All of this is going on. Cortisol, well, there's adrenaline is also a hormone probably being released at that time, but cortisol is being released, and that comes from these pretty things called the adrenals. Adrenals regulate the body's response to distress and produces and triggers necessary hormones to support an efficient recovery. Think about it. Adrenals are connected with metabolism, immune system, blood pressure, response to stress, development of sexual characteristics. We just can't live without our adrenals. And if removed because of like an emergency or necessary in order for like the physical body to survive, um, then we have to be on medications because we still need something to help help our body function in a way to sustain us. Childhood traumas associated with elevated cortisol metabolism in adults with schizophrenia and bipolar. So this particular research looked at adults who had schizophrenia and bipolar, and they self-reported childhood traumas, and that elevation of cortisol was elevated. And so that was just a little research study to tell you that there's a connection there. Traumas trigger the HPA axis reaction. These three organs produce and under and overproduce hormones. If this occurs in the childhood symptom presentation, It includes, but not limiting to, and so this was another research when they looked at HPA axis reactions in children, what hormones were under or overproduced, what were some of the symptoms they saw? Acne, deeper voice, altering growth spurts, high blood pressure, muscle and bone aches, weight gain, delay in growth, a round face, bruising, and irritability and anxiety. 5 symptoms. And if you know children, if you reflect on how it was when you were a child, were you going through an HPA axis reaction? Did any of those 5 symptoms show up? Often the mind will say, I'm not sick, I'm fine. The mind could say, I'm fine, I'm not sick. The body is going to tell us the truth. That's often what I share with people. Oh, you might not tell me the truth, or you might lie to me, or you might convince me of something, but your body is going to tell the truth. And that was just another research article that I wanted to share. There may be more of a relationship between childhood teen suicide, depression, and anxiety in situations where the adrenals are overworked. HPA Access supports protocols that should include an assessment of mental health disorders. Whenever we are assessing young people and kids, because we are adults, we are healthy adults, we are there to help navigate kids into adult worlds and be independent and learn how to survive and all of that. Part of our responsibility is to ensure that their mental health and their emotional health is taken care of. I see it with schools developing new programs. However, the deficiency part is nobody is talking about the adrenals and the adrenal overload that is occurring with our young kids in these school systems. So if you want to develop a program, make for sure part of that program is really targeting things that support the adrenals in kids. And that's just about kids, but we're going to get back to the whole world population pretty soon. And here's just another quote that I'll share. Adrenals are an essential pyramid-shaped gland that are situated just above the kidneys. If depleted, one may experience depression, anxiety, struggles with focus, dizziness, fatigue, disruptions with sleep, and cravings for sweet and salty foods. Make for sure you get your HPA Access checkup as part of your mental wellness plan. This definitely should be included not only in conversations with your primary care doctor or your psychiatrist, but also if you are seeing anyone in terms of the mental health field, to make for sure that they are also knowing that maybe your depression symptoms are related to maybe an underfunctioning adrenal, an underfunctioning process of your adrenals. And there are definitely some things that you can do to start supporting that. So I have mentioned HPA axis dysregulation for adrenals before, but what is that? That's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal. So that's what HPA stands for, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal. And if you wanted to even dive deeper, we're going to put a T on that for thyroid, but we're not going to talk about that in this presentation, but thyroid is definitely very important. So this is the first part. It is the communication systems between these 3 organs, and this is considered the primary stress response system. Let me say that again. So when we talk about stress and how I am perceiving that bus accident, my hypothalamus, my pituitary, and my adrenal, how are they communicating during that time is relaying something through the body and how it's going to respond or react in terms of how I'm dealing with the situation, how I'm managing the situation or the accident. When one experiences chronic stressors and traumas, the communication between the organs breaks down and the system becomes dysregulated. When one experiences chronic stressors, how many stressors do you have in your life? Are you just stressed with one thing? Maybe it's like a relationship and that is the biggest stress in my life. Or do you have relationship issues, work issues, family issues, food issues, surgery issues, lack of getting into nature issues and appreciation? Do you have negative self-talk? Do you have lack of movement in the body? Do you have agitation arising in the body? All of these things can be contributing to chronic stress. And are you taking care of the adrenals as a form of prevention so that you don't go down that slope, down that hill towards illness and disease, but you're trying to get that path, go down that path towards wellness and healing? Early research explained that the process of hypoadrenia, which what used to be called, which is called adrenal fatigue historically, the definition is a deficiency in the functioning of the adrenal glands. Too much physical, emotional, environmental, and or psychological stress can deplete your adrenals, causing a decrease in the output of adrenal hormones, particularly cortisol. And this reminds me of a time very early in my career was I would go to an interview and someone would ask that question, what are your good qualities? And I would always say, I'm great at multitasking. I could do this, this, and everything will get done. I know how to prioritize. I can do multiple things at the same time. Do you know how much cortisol was being released during that time for maybe jobs or working for other people, or even working for myself where that wasn't healthy? I was releasing too much cortisol. And so, what I originally had perceived at the time as a strength actually became a hindrance and started to lead me down the path of disease, which I believe is one of the reasons why I started to have adrenal slash thyroid slash diagnosis. Hashimoto shows up. So, adrenals. And here are just some examples of how adrenals are affected by when we think of the mind, the grief and loss. So, adrenals aren't just stress, the cortisol stress hormone is not just released when there is an external stress. They are released with mental stresses, physical stresses, and I even argue spiritual stressors. So, grief and loss, traumas, whether or not they were post-traumatic, complex, or developmental. If you had attachments that were more anxious or avoidant or disorganized, negative self-talk, ooh, that is so acidic to the body. I can't do this. Oh, I'm not good at this. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not smart enough. I can't fit in this group. Acidic, acidic, acidic. Lack of stillness. Can we just slow down? Or is there constant movement? Are we talking with our hands? Are we constantly moving around? Is it hard just to sit? And I don't want to say watch TV because I don't know if that's always good for people, but maybe just sit in silence. Is that easy or difficult for you? Sleep challenges and disorders. And maybe there's also this rigid personality structure where there's lack of flexibility. Like those are all the things. And if you're in therapy working with a psychotherapist, those would be areas to start kind of working on. Like, how can you have positive self-talk? What are the skills and tools that you can have in your toolbox? How can you have flexibility with your personality and let things go and be forgiving and show compassion? Physical aspects, poor nutrition. And I say, like anybody middle class and under, you probably were born into families where there were poor nutrition because the grocery stores that are near you probably didn't have an abundance of organic opportunities and foods for you. Um, so poor nutrition may have started in utero from your parents and your mother's nutrition that she got into her diet. Allergies. Allergies definitely are related to the impact in terms of how our body is responding because there's all these reactions being built up coming out in the skin. It's building up in the lungs and mucus is accumulating and agitation is building. Environmental toxins, things that we breathe in, lack of movement in the body, not enough sweating. Our body detoxifies in four ways: through our breath, through our urine, through our poop and through our sweat. And when we're kids, we tend to sweat, at least we move our bodies a little bit more. As we get older, sometimes that stops for some of us. So sweating is good, and maybe looking at tools that you can use to kind of help you in that process. Prescription and non-prescription medications, things that are made over the counter that are given to you. Although you may have a headache, it is still putting a stressor on the body. It is still putting a toxin into the body that the body needs to do in order to work harder to remove that toxin. And the body does a great job in doing that. It's just we keep putting more and more and more. It's never just one. It's like more and more and more, and it builds up and builds up. If we have an acute or chronic infection, even surgeries or injuries to the body. So if you have a broken toe, I broke my toe the other day, a couple of weeks ago, and my body is going to release cortisol. So it's not just the mental stresses. I also want you to consider the physical stressors you're going through, and then now the spiritual aspects. How can spirituality, lack of spiritual freedom contribute to more cortisol needing to be released in the body as it is in response to a trauma? Lack of spiritual freedom. If you were told that you can only be one particular way, worship one God, that may be okay for some. Your perception may be like, okay, this sits with me. I love God, and let's all cheer and celebrate in the same way in our ritual practices and celebrations. But if your perception is questionable, then there's a conflict. And that conflict is uncomfortable inside the body, and cortisol has to be released because it is trying to protect you. Force or judgments, beliefs about God. If you're told that if you show up a particular way, God won't love you. If you say a particular thing, believe in a particular thought, that God will shun you or something like that. That internally, remember when I talked about the psyche? The one thing that all, even international research will agree to is that trauma does reside in the psyche. That's where the spiritual trauma is. And that's why it's so deep in core and needs to be a part of these conversations. New research in terms of epigenetics and genes and how things are transmitted through our genes, whether or not that is the actual change in the structure of the genetic makeover, whether that is an infant watching their parents learn how to behave and operate in the world, that is still transmitted from there. And that goes from generations. They say 7 generations. Challenges with self-love, not feeling that your life has a purpose or a meaning. That's core. The body has to do something to try to find some way to resolve that belief system, that being out of balance. That's not a homeostasis place. That's an imbalance place. That's disequilibrium. Deprived, deprived of free will. That means that you are told things to do and not given free will and free choices about your life. Struggles with purpose in life. Like, what is your purpose? Do you feel you have a clear understanding and a connection to your life purpose? Has that always been there since childhood? Has it come and gone during different periods of your life? Like, that's essential, right? Are you releasing cortisol because something is being unresolved within the body? And conforming to opposing beliefs. You just do it because of the majority, but it's not very comfortable. Your perception is off, and you're forcing the physical body to conform, and that often will impact the adrenals. So see how there can be so many things without even talking about trauma. If I ask you, were you abused or neglected, and you say no, so I must not have trauma, I hope this gives you a broader perspective that how you're perceiving your experience, even in childhood because that's still subconsciously coming out. That's still subconsciously stored in your mind. And we're not even talking about the unconscious stuff that still needs to be worked through, but that it's impacting your adrenals. And that's why I kind of packed that, selected these to review. And this also brings me to just a um, wonderful thoughts about the flight or fight reaction. And usually people will say flight or fight, or they'll say, well, what about freeze? Or what about fawn? Like all of that also is inclusive too. So when I think about it, I'm including all the ways that the body is reacting to keep you in a homeostasis balanced place. An event occurs and the body perceives the event as a threat. Remember that perception. This triggers flight or fight reaction. And within this trigger, a complex of physical and biochemical changes in the nervous system, along with hormones. So, like when that fight or flight is activated, things are changing in the body. Hormones like cortisol is being released through the adrenals. The brain communicates to the body through the automatic nervous system, which is responsible for involuntary actions such as alteration in breathing patterns, blood fluctuations in heartbeat, changes in blood pressure. And within that, the nervous system has two components, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. But when we talk about fight or flight, we are in this case talking about the sympathetic nervous system, which is activated, and a reaction, boom, is going to be triggered. So fight is one's reaction to fight through the perceived threat in an aggressive way. So you might see that increase in blood pressure. You might see a faster heartbeat, clenched fists, tight jaws, constricted body parts. There may be a surge of another hormone called adrenaline release in the body. And this urges the physical destruction and maybe constant agitation of the body. Someone is easily annoyed or irritated. In a flight mode, one's reaction is to immediately leave the situation, bye-bye, and go away and escape. This is noticed by a surge of adrenaline too. So adrenaline is still released in the body, and it helps to prepare the body to run and flee and be gone. One may be increasingly jumpy. So you might notice a lot of movement, shakiness, rigid movements are noticed in the body, and there is a sense of feeling trapped and panic. So if you're in a car, you can actually physiologically see the panic attacking if they're in an enclosed area. Sometimes it happens for people in cars, elevators, things where they feel that the environment is closing in on them and they just got to get out and go. Freeze is one's reaction to shutting down and turning click off the switch. Things are slowed down in the body. One may experience just a slowing of the heart rate, detaching from the present moment, lack of movement, even numbness in the body arises, and often the person may feel immobile. They can't talk, make decisions, lack focus or attention. They may even hold their breath in, appear confused. And usually this reaction is in reaction to high levels of anxiety and trauma being perceived by the individual. 5. One's reaction to comply and to submit to the person or experience. Remember when I talked about that in terms of spirituality and including this in the conversation? To put one's needs before one's individual needs. The person is reacting obediently. The individual struggles to set boundaries and can't say no. They desire to people please and are often agreeable. Is that you? Do you kind of show up as agreeable and do what everybody else kind of wants and go places and engage in activities for the good of the group? It's also affecting Your sympathetic nervous system, I want you to consider that. Usually the reaction is linked to abusive situations when fighting back causes more abuse than surrendering the abuse. And fawn can be a reaction in the fawn state, usually is discovered with depth work in therapy. So, not on the surface of work, but if you choose to work with a therapist and you go deeper into the work to really explore where some of this is coming from, you may see that some of the reactions have been fawn, have been are manifested because of some earlier experiences, because it was not safe to do one or the other, have or engage with one of the other reactions. The body has a beautiful way to heal itself. When the triggering event occurs, the body releases cortisol, that hormone, to prepare the body to manage stress. Once the triggering event is no longer a threat, the body begins to recover. The recovery can last 1 to 2 days, and less cortisol will be produced. This brings the cortisol level back into a balanced state. Beautiful. Don't you just love this beautiful thing that the body does to keep us healthy and keep us surviving? There's some challenges, especially now in the 20th century. Challenges arise, and when the fight and flight reaction is constantly triggered before recovery can be established, you have one thing happen after another: a work stress, a job stress, a medical stress, a kid stress. And there's no 1 or 2 days separating that. Now you have repetitive things going on, and the body doesn't get to recover. Remember when I talked about that job interview and they said what was a good skill? And I said multitasking. Woo! Did I not know how much cortisol would be released during multitasking events? Tons and tons. And it was releasing so much, I was getting into a depleted state. When traumas are repeated and layered, there is no time for the body to recover because cortisol is constantly released. When traumas are multiple, such as events in complex and developmental traumas, then this all forms the flight or fight reactions, which remember includes all four of those: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, are triggered and overwhelm the body. What happens to a light bulb that is kept on all day? What do you think? What about all week? All month? Can you go 6 months with the light bulb? Maybe you have a really energy sufficient light bulb. What about 2 years, 3 years? It is bright and shiny at first. Then it loses its brightness and begins to flicker, goes in and out, and eventually is depleted. Are we depleting our life force? Remember, the nervous system has two components: the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The parasympathetic nervous system is the response to control and balance the flight or fight reaction and downregulates the body's primarily through the vagus nerve. The nerve sends messages back and forth from the brain and the body. During this process, the body slows down, heart rate drops, thoughts are more focused, digestive systems are activated. The vagus nerve controls digestion, heart rate, and the immune system as it passes from the lower part of the brain stem through the neck, the throat, the heart, the lungs, the abdomen, and the digestive tract. Let's take a moment to just think about that. What do you want, huh? What do you want? Do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want this? The parasympathetic nervous system is the response to control and balance, this flight and fight reaction. So, what if we learn to say no and set boundaries with others and ourselves? Dedicate an active plan to getting enough good quality sleep. We're consistent with supplements, zinc, magnesium, vitamin C, vitamin Bs, and eating highly nutritious organic foods. Move the body throughout the course of the day. Consumed our first meal within 1 hour of waking with an organic protein option. Went outside 2 to 3 times per day, smiled and laughed, and celebrated the earth. Drank clean water and avoided BPAs. Meditated and relaxed several times a day, including salt baths once in a while. Worked with positive self-talk and reframing our experiences. What if we learn to listen to the body, get the mind out of the way, so the body can do what it does innately? Heal, heal, and heal. I invite you to join me for a few moments in any way that may feel useful. So I'm just going to allow you to get in a space that is comfortable for your body. I am going to choose to sit in my chair. And I'll invite you to practice in any way that may suit your needs at this time. One way I like to come into my practice is placing a hand on my stomach and one on my heart. But you can do it in any way that serves you, that is comfortable for you. Another option may be to place both hands just down by your side. Maybe you choose to bring your palms up, maybe palms down. And maybe you just notice what it's like to breathe into your body. This is your body. You only have one body. What do you notice about your breaths? Just being mindfully aware, not with judgment, negative self-talk, just taking notice. And what if you made a choice to change your breathing patterns? And maybe part of that choices is to know what it's like to be in your body. If you breathe faster or slower, what is it like maybe to explore holding your breath or maybe letting it just go? And that you have many options in this moment. Whatever options you're choosing, it is the option for you in this moment. Just taking note, you might notice other sensations arising in the body. You might notice temperature changes, and without judgment, just being present in whatever way and whatever capacity is useful for you in this moment. Then, just as a simple reminder, I'm just going to count from 1 to 3. And that's when I will complete the practice. And you can have many choices about continuing or stopping the video or going back to continue to watch. 1, 2, and 3. I hope that that was helpful for you. Because, like with anything, when I talk about trauma, when I talk about flight or fight, now we're going to enter into a healing space. The rest and digest. So, what I like to include when I think about rest and digest is what are some options in terms of food? Some nutritional options to support integrating trauma experiences with the mind, body, and spirit, and supporting the HPA Axis support adrenal health. We got to consider removing processed foods. We got to get dairy and gluten out of the diet. We got to move towards more organic, raw, and cooked vegetables. Nutrient dense foods provides and encourages the repair and the healing of the HPA axis. For breakfast, I'll have a cup of warm water, maybe with sea moss on some days. On other days, I'll do apple cider vinegar. On other days, I'll do salt. I'll ask my body, I'll ask my adrenals, what do you need? Protein is essential in the morning to help regulate blood sugar. Some examples may be soaked chia, flax, basil seeds in a nut milk with cinnamon overnight. Oh, one of my favorite things in the morning. You can even add a little bit of berries if your blood sugar is still stable. Maybe blueberries. Let's not get a little too much sugar in the morning. I also will add some powdered ashwagandha or ginseng. This normalizes adrenal activity and is an adaptogen to help cope with stress throughout the day. Like, how beautiful is that? We can't get rid of all of our stressors, but we can give our body some nutritional support. You can give your body some nutritional support. For a lunch, maybe a large salad with organic rainbow colored vegetables, and maybe we add some nuts and seeds on that. Maybe we sprinkle a blend of seaweeds. Maybe we use homemade dressings and not store-bought dressings. I should do store-bought. Whatever the path to illness and disease is store-bought dressings, whatever the path to wellness and healings are homemade dressings. The adrenals love vitamin C. So get it from your vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, cabbage. Ooh, Brussels sprouts and bok choy, my favorites, both cooked and raw. Dinner, maybe if you feel like you need a little bit more something of substance, some cooked black beans with rice, but make for sure you get those dark green vegetables in there. The vitamin B's, calcium, zinc, and magnesium are essential in therapeutic range with a healthy balance of sodium and potassium to support the balance of the HPA axis. Remember to continue to monitor your blood sugar so nothing drops below 70. And ideally, we like to be not above 100, but 110 is still a sweet spot if we're working on this stuff. Life sends us experiences. If we allow the experience to remain with us in damaging and destructive ways, it leads to suffering and disease. If we allow the experience to nudge us towards wellness and growth, then it is not suffering, but it is the experience of joy and health. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. No, literally, thank yourself because your HPA axis needs it. When working to heal the body, mind, and spirit, seek out qualified professions to support you in your process. You are the expert in your healing, but sometimes the ego shows up as a distraction. A professional can teach you about a wellness plan in collaboration with your innate expertise. And then here are my references. And I just wanted to share my last thoughts and ways of contacting me. If you'd like to contact me, my name is Tanya Octave, and you can visit me on the website. You can shoot me an email at tanyaoctave-lcsw.com, and I will do whatever I can to help navigate the conversations and the questions that you may have. You have one body. Disease doesn't start in our 80s or our 60s. Disease starts in adolescence, and sometimes disease begins in childhood. Take care, be well, and I encourage you to work on developing your mental wellness plan.